I used to work the night shift at a small 24-hour diner just off Highway 19 in Ohio. It wasn't a bad job. The pay sucked, sure, but the nights were quiet. Most of the time, it was just me, a line cook named Ray, and the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. We opened all night for truckers, insomniacs, and the occasional drunk college kid. On good nights, you'd get maybe 3 or 4 customers past midnight. On bad nights, you'd get none, and the silence would settle in like fog. It was mid-January when the weirdness started. It was around 1:40 a.m. when I noticed him, a man sitting alone in booth 7. He hadn't come in through the front door. I just looked up from refilling the coffee pot, and there he was. Gray jacket, black cap, hands folded neatly on the table. No menu, no drink, just sitting there. I asked if he wanted coffee. He nodded once, didn't speak. When I brought it, he stared out the window the entire time, not moving, not drinking. The glass was fogged up from the cold, but I could see the faint reflection of his face, pale, still, like he wasn't even breathing. At 2:30, I turned back around, and he was gone. No bell from the door, no footsteps, nothing. Just an untouched cup of coffee still steaming. Ray swore I imagined it. He said he'd been in the kitchen the whole time and never saw anyone come or go. I worked again the next night, around the same time, 1:40 a.m. I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. Booth 7, same man, same jacket, same cap, same seat. I told Ray, "Look, man, booth 7. But when he leaned out of the kitchen window, the booth was empty again. "You need sleep, kid," he said, chuckling. But the coffee cup I'd left from the night before was missing by the 3rd night. I was jumpy. The manager thought it was funny and said maybe I'd been watching too many ghost shows. I tried brushing it off. I kept the radio low, wiped tables, and avoided looking toward the booths. Around 2 a.m., the lights flickered, just once. When they came back, every single sugar packet on the counter was standing upright, perfectly balanced. No one else was there. The air turned cold enough that I could see my breath. I heard the faint sound of someone breathing behind me. I turned. Nothing. But when I looked toward booth 7, there was a single coffee cup sitting there again, half empty, steam rising. Ray called out sick, so I was completely alone. I told myself I wasn't going to look. I'd serve anyone who came in, but I wouldn't go near that booth. Around 2:15 a.m., the phone at the register rang. When I answered, there was static and a man's voice whispering, "You forgot the bill." I froze. "Who is this?" No answer, just the click of the line going dead. When I turned around, booth 7's light was flickering, and that same man was sitting there again, staring right at me through the dim light. Except this time, his eyes were pure white. Like milk. I dropped the phone. When I blinked, the booth was empty again. I quit 2 days later. The manager laughed when I told him why, but a week after I left, Ray called me. He said, "You remember that guy you kept seeing in booth 7? Apparently, a customer had a heart attack in that exact seat almost 15 years earlier, died before the ambulance even arrived. Same jacket, same cap. The diner still keeps booth 7 taped off at night now. Some people say it's out of respect, but I know better. Because sometimes, when I drive past at night, I can still see a pale shape sitting there, watching the road through the window." I'd been working nights at a mid-range hotel restaurant just outside Nashville for about 6 months. We served dinner until 11 p.m. and then a late-night menu until 3 a.m. Mostly travelers, truckers, and hotel guests wandering in half asleep for coffee or a burger. It was steady, boring work until the maintenance crew started renovating the basement kitchen. It began on a Thursday, around 12:45 a.m. I was rolling silverware when I heard the swinging kitchen door creak open behind me. I turned, expecting my coworker Angie. Nobody there. The door was still swinging a little, like someone had just gone through. I peeked inside. The lights in the prep room were off, but the steel table gleamed faintly from the hallway bulbs. Nothing. I told myself the air conditioning vent must have pushed it. 10 minutes later, same thing. Door opens. Slow creak. Stops halfway. This time I closed it firmly, sliding the little metal bolt across. Not 5 minutes later, bang, 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 3 knocks from the other side. Hard ones. I froze. My phone screen lit up the clock, 1:13 a.m., when I unbolted it and looked inside. The lights were on now. I swear I'd left them off. I told Angie about it the next night. She rolled her eyes and said, "That door's always weird. The basement's got bad wiring. Don't think too much about it." Around 2 a.m., she went for a smoke break. While she was outside, the door creaked again. I ignored it, but then something slid across the floor, a faint scraping sound. When I glanced through the little circular window, I saw a shadow moving between the shelves, like someone pacing slowly back and forth. I thought maybe a maintenance guy had come in through the service hallway. I pushed the door open halfway and called, "Hey, you can't be back here." No answer, but there was a smell, something like burnt meat and bleach mixed together. And right as I stepped in, the light above the walk-in freezer popped and went dark. The door behind me swung shut. I pushed it, expecting it to swing open easily. It didn't. The handle turned, but something on the other side was pressing it closed. I could feel the weight, like a hand holding it. "Angie," I said, voice shaking. "Nothing then." Whisper quiet. A single drag across the floor, like boots, and from the darkness near the freezer, a faint breath, raspy and close. I backed toward the door, shoving harder until it finally gave. When I burst into the dining area, Angie was just walking in from outside. She laughed when she saw my face. "You look like you saw a ghost." All I said was, "Don't go in the kitchen." Maintenance finished the basement work a week later. They found something when they tore up the tiles by the freezer. A small metal tag with the hotel's old name engraved on it, and a date scratched beneath. 1989. Our manager told us a chef had died down there that year. Carbon monoxide leak. No one had used the lower kitchen since. The restaurant's newer staff don't believe the stories, but I do, because every so often, when I'm doing closing duties and the dining room's empty, I still hear the sound of that door creaking open, slow and heavy, and the faintest drag of boots across the tile. I worked at a small family restaurant just off the interstate in northern Arizona. It wasn't fancy, mostly truckers, families passing through, or old locals who wanted cheap coffee and conversation. I usually took the late shift because I was saving up for college, and honestly, I liked the quiet. Once the rush died down around midnight, it was just me, the cook, and the buzz of the neon sign outside flickering against the window. One night, about 1:30 in the morning, a man walked in wearing a long brown coat and a baseball cap pulled low. I greeted him like I always did, but he didn't respond. He just pointed to the booth near the back corner, the one right under the big wall clock that hadn't worked in years. I brought him water and a menu, and he just stared at the table. After a few minutes, I asked if he wanted to order anything. He finally spoke, low and hoarse. "Just coffee." I brought it over, but before I even set it down, he said, "Black, no sugar." His voice was dry, almost shaky. I nodded and went back to the counter. I tried not to stare, but something about him made me uneasy. He wasn't eating, not drinking, just sitting there, hands flat on the table, eyes fixed on the window. The diner was empty, except for him and the hum of the refrigerator in the back. Every time I glanced over, he was in the exact same position. No movement, no sound. The cook, Marcus, came out to refill his soda and noticed him too. "That guy's been here long?" he asked. "Just came in," I said. but my voice didn't sound convincing. I don't know why, but I couldn't shake the feeling he'd been there longer. At around 2, Marcus stepped out back for a smoke, and I started wiping down tables. The coffee pot was still half full, the radio whispering softly behind the counter. I was just finishing when I realized something strange. The man's reflection in the window wasn't moving, even though his hand was now resting on his coffee cup. The reflection stayed frozen. I blinked a few times, trying to shake it off. Maybe I was tired, or maybe the neon sign was just flickering weirdly. But then, when I turned to look directly at him, his seat was empty. The cup of coffee was still steaming, though, like it had just been poured. I looked toward the door, still closed. No sound, no bell. I called Marcus's name, trying to sound casual, but there was no answer. I walked toward the kitchen and froze when I saw the man's coat draped neatly over one of the prep tables. I hadn't seen him go back there. The lights flickered, and for a split second, I thought I saw a shadow moving just behind the freezer, tall, thin, almost stretching toward the ceiling. Then everything went dark. The hum of the neon sign, the refrigerator, the radio, all cut out at once. The only sound left was a slow, steady dripping from somewhere near the sink. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. When the power flickered back on, Marcus was standing in the kitchen doorway, pale and shaking. I started to ask what happened, but he cut me off. "Don't," he said. "Just don't talk about it." We both looked at the prep table, and the coat was gone. We didn't say a word for the rest of the shift. At sunrise, we locked up early and left. A few days later, the manager told us the power failure had been caused by an electrical short near the back storage room, the same spot. Marcus had seen something move. I quit 2 weeks later. Marcus stayed a little longer, but he told me that every now and then, when he'd clean after closing, he'd find a coffee cup half full and still warm sitting in that back booth, the one under the broken clock. And he swears that, once or twice, he's seen a man's reflection in the window when the booth was empty. I got my first restaurant job when I was 19, at a small diner on the edge of town that used to be a gas station decades ago. The walls were yellowed with age, the floor tiles cracked in places, and the sign outside buzzed louder than the jukebox inside. Most nights were calm, just a few regulars, a couple of late-night travelers. I didn't mind the quiet. The only part that ever really bothered me was the employee door at the end of the hallway by the bathrooms. It led down to an old storage cellar that nobody used anymore. The manager said the place flooded years back, and they never bothered to clean it out. He kept it locked, but the door always had this way of rattling when the air conditioner kicked on, like someone lightly trying the handle from the other side. It became a sort of background noise after a while, something you stopped noticing until it got too quiet. One Friday, my coworker Julie called out sick, so it was just me and the cook, Dennis, holding down the night shift. The rain was coming down hard, making the windows hum. Around 1:30, I was refilling ketchup bottles when the employee door rattled harder than usual, a single sharp clack 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 like metal tapping against metal. I looked down the hall, and I swear I saw the doorknob move, just slightly. I called out to Dennis, thinking maybe he was grabbing something from the cellar, but his voice came from the kitchen. "You good out there?" he asked. I told him the door was shaking again. He laughed and said, "That door's been weird since before I started." I tried to ignore it, but every few minutes it would rattle again, faint, impatient. Around 2, the rain stopped, and the diner went completely silent, except for the clock ticking above the register. I was pouring coffee for a trucker when the noise came again, only this time it wasn't rattling. It was knocking, slow, deliberate, 3 times. The trucker looked toward the hallway and asked if someone was locked down there. I forced a laugh and said no, probably just the pipes. But the truth was, I was sweating. The air had gone thick and cold, like the air conditioning had died. I walked toward the door, trying to be brave, but stopped when I saw something that made my stomach drop. A line of wet footprints leading from the door all the way to the end of the hallway, where they just stopped. They weren't there before. Dennis came out wiping his hands on a towel and asked what was wrong. I told him about the footprints, but when he looked, they were gone. The floor was dry. He gave me this look like I was losing it. I didn't say anything else. At around 2:40, I went to restock napkins near the bathrooms, and as I passed the door, I heard breathing, soft, ragged, just inches away on the other side. My whole body locked up. I took a slow step back, heart pounding. Then the handle turned. I ran straight for the kitchen, yelling for Dennis. He grabbed a flashlight and marched back with me. The door was closed, still locked. He even jiggled the handle to show me. See, nothing. We both stood there a moment, and that's when we heard it. A single knock from the other side, faint but clear as day. Dennis's face drained of color. He didn't say a word, just walked back to the kitchen and stayed there until morning. The next day, the manager replaced the lock and said it was probably the wind. But a week later, the morning shift guy went down there to check something with the breaker, and he quit the same day. He wouldn't say what he saw, only that the floor was covered in muddy footprints leading toward the stairs, but none leading back out. I still drive by that diner sometimes on my way home from work. It's closed now, windows boarded up, but every once in a while, when I stop at the light outside, I can swear I see a faint glow under that same employee door, and the shape of someone standing just behind it. I used to work at a small Italian restaurant that sat right on the edge of town, tucked between a laundromat and an old movie rental store that had been closed for years. We stayed open late until 3 a.m. on weekends, mostly to catch bar crowds and night shift workers from the nearby hospital. I usually worked the closing shift with 2 cooks and a dishwasher named Louise. The place had a warm feel during the day, but once midnight hit and the last group left, it changed. The air got heavy. The music felt too loud even when it was low, and every sound, the sizzle from the kitchen, the hum from the beer cooler started to echo. One night around 2:15 a.m., the front door opened, and this man walked in, middle-aged, tall, with a neat beard and a black jacket that looked out of place in the summer heat. I greeted him like usual, and he smiled, but something about it didn't feel real. It was too slow, too deliberate, like he'd practiced it. He sat near the front window and asked for a table for one. I brought him water and handed him a menu, and he looked at it without turning a page. After a minute, he said, "I'll have the special." We didn't have a special that night. I told him that, but he just nodded, eyes still on the menu, and said, "You do now." Louis called out from the back, asking who the last customer was, and I shouted back that it was just one guy. While he was plating a few leftover pasta dishes, I looked at the man again and realized he hadn't touched his water. His hands were flat on the table, perfectly still. When I brought out the food, he smiled again. "Looks just like I remembered," he said quietly. Then he started eating slow, careful bites, like he was savoring it. Halfway through, he stopped and said, "You keep the recipe the same." I told him I was just the waiter, but he didn't respond. A few minutes later, he stood, pulled a few bills from his pocket, and placed them on the table. I thanked him, and he looked me right in the eye and said, "Tell Marco it's perfect." I didn't think much of it until I realized something. We hadn't had anyone named Marco working there since the original owner, Marco Ferraro, died in 1998. That was almost 15 years before I even started. When I turned back toward the booth, the man was gone. The front door hadn't opened. No sound, no footsteps, just the faint clink of the fork still spinning on the plate. Louis came out to ask what was wrong, and I told him what the man said. His face went pale. "You mean Marco Ferraro?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. Luis walked to the front window, staring out into the parking lot. My uncle worked here when Marco died. He said, "Heart attack, right here in this dining room." They said he was eating the lasagna, said his last words were, "It's perfect." We didn't talk after that. I cleared the table, but when I reached for the bills, they weren't there. Just an old, crumpled receipt, browned with age, and a faint smear of red sauce that hadn't been on the plate before. I stayed at that restaurant for a few more months, but I never saw that man again. Sometimes, though, when I'm driving home late and past the place, I catch a glimpse of someone sitting in that same booth near the window. The neon sign outside flickers just enough to light up his face, and every time, he's smiling. If you enjoyed these stories, be sure to like the video, subscribe for more true horror stories, and comment below if you've ever had a night shift experience you still can't explain. Thanks for watching, and stay safe out there.